We hear a lot these days about being competitive in a global marketplace, and one man with his hand on the pulse of what's happening globally is Jonathan Woetzel. He's the director of the McKinsey Global Institute. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Christy. Pleasure.
Why don't you go ahead and start off by giving us some ideas of what are some of the biggest ways that business in China has impacted business here in Michigan?
Well, there are a couple of things that are really important. Obviously, it's a market. So China today is perhaps the largest automotive market, and that has, I think, created a big pull for Michigan products and services to come to China and meet the needs of the Chinese consumer. At the same time, it's a big market, it's starting to become a competitor. Whether we're looking at components or finished goods from China, it's starting to appear in our products in our supermarkets and our grocery stores everywhere. And it's hard to buy Christmas tree lights if they don't come from China. Right. So it's both a market and a competitive challenge.
But we haven't yet seen the real big ticket items from China on in our marketplace. When would you expect to see Chinese vehicles, for example, on our streets?
Well, I think there's still quite a ways to go. China is becoming more of a higher technology country, and so it really doesn't export textiles and toys as much as it is more about machinery and electronic goods, but still some way to go before they really master things like integrating systems, and that capacity to build a whole ecosystem, that's still one way off. But in reality, a lot of what you do see, even in finished goods today, some exports are coming from China, and there are some cars already out there.
So talk to us a little bit about a competitive global marketplace. We're always talking about how can we get ahead, how can Michigan get ahead, and what are some of the ways that you think Michigan can compete with Asian countries?
Well, the first and most important thing is about knowledge-intensive trade. Actually, if you look at the United States, it's one of the only countries, advanced countries in the world that runs a deficit on knowledge-intensive trade. And so this is an amazing thing. We should really figure out how to take advantage of what we've got, which is the knowledge of our people. And that's largely comes down to small and medium-sized enterprises, local companies, and helping them figure out how to export, how to enter new markets. That's one thing that Michigan could do right now. A better job of is thinking through where and how to do that, how to help the small guy.
What about education? I'm sorry, Nolan. What about education, though?
Well, education is the bedrock. I mean, without that, we can't be successful, and that's historically been one of the strengths. But if we look more recently, in the last couple of decades, in the United States, the scores, particularly in K through 12 and STEM, has been falling. We're number 30 or something like that in these rankings of mathematics. So, reinvesting there. I think there's still the higher education, the colleges and universities. That's the star of the system. But shoring it up at the foundation, that's got to be a critical agenda item.
But you talk about exporting knowledge, and there is a concern of how well China can be trusted in terms of intellectual property theft and other concerns. Are we making any progress towards building a greater degree of trust with China when it comes to trade?
I think there is progress being made, but let's be clear, the relationship of the United States and China is a trade-based relationship. There's very little of a common foundation when it comes to issues of law or culture or community relationships. So this is going to be one step at a time. In that context, a company needs to look out for itself. It really does need to have a strategy to protect its core intellectual property, what's going to go in, what's going to stay out, and how to manage that.
Is that possible? I mean, are there steps companies can take?
Well, we have seen a lot of successful examples, whether we're talking about tires or glass or automotive components, thinking through who is going to be your key person in that country and what their relationships are and how do you manage your employees. And Chinese companies are doing the same. They're the ones who are actually on the front foot about protecting intellectual property right now because they want to defend their own property as well.
Jonathan, what about making Michigan an attractive place for companies internationally to want to come and do business? How important is it to have strong city centers, strong urban areas?
Well, it's critical because people ultimately stick because of their families. And sort of creating a welcoming community environment that includes thinking about education for the kids and family centers for the whole extended community, that creates the stickiness. Otherwise, we get people who are essentially coming through for maybe a couple of years, they do their time in a company or they go to university and then they leave. And that's a bad thing for Michigan. So Michigan should try to get those people to stay because they create new jobs. Every one core value job that one attracts here creates 5 other related jobs for services and their families and so forth. So getting those people who've come here for a purpose to stay, that's one of the easiest and most important opportunities, which is all about the community. It's all about the urban development.
Now you see a lot of Chinese dollars coming into this country to be invested in real estate and other ventures. What are the opportunities in Detroit and Michigan for attracting those Chinese dollars.
Well, that's a really good point. Because I think last year was about $235 billion worth of foreign direct investment in the United States. That's about 60% of Michigan's GDP. That's a big number. I don't think that's only going to get bigger, and a lot of that's coming from China. There's this wall of money coming, and so how to use that? Does it mean, is it all going to go into strip malls somewhere in commercial real estate, or can it be channeled into economic development, into good manufacturing jobs, and into creating viable city centers? I think that's a lot down to the state and local and the business community to say, what are our priorities? We've got to set things. If we don't say what we want, any direction is fine.
Right.
All right. Well, thanks for your insight. We appreciate it. Jonathan Woetzel for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you
Thanks for
very
being
much.
here.